Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a designer, publisher, podcaster, and at this point, veteran of the world of games. He started as a rabid fan of Heroscape, but is most well known for the publishing house that he founded, Plaid Hat Games, which has published some of the most well-known games in the hobby. These include Summoner Wars, Dead of Winter, and Mice and Mystics. He's worked as an independent, under a corporate umbrella, and recently bought Plaid Hat back and started the independent journey once again. My guest this week is Colby Dauch. Colby, welcome to the cabin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So my first question is, how difficult was it for you to pick the 5 games to take to the cabin?
It wasn't too tough. I tried to pick based on strategy. I tried to metagame the game, which I imagine most of your guests do.
And what was that sort of strategy that you used? Was it utility?
Well, I don't know how long the apocalypse is supposed to last, so it was things that I thought would have longevity.
And sort of, what kind of a person are you? Are you someone who is materialistic? Do you love the things around you, or would you be quite sanguine to have your collection go up in flames and only have these 5 games?
I don't think I would be too distraught. I could live a pretty minimalist lifestyle. Games would obviously be a welcome distraction. I imagine we don't have, our cell phones and our television and whatnot. So, I don't feel a great need to own things and for status sake or anything like that.
And, having listened to your previous podcast output, you have something of a reputation of an outdoorsman, and especially choking bears. So how would you fare in the apocalypse? Would you be able to choke a bear and skin a rabbit?
Well, that's the alter ego of Kodiak Colby, which I did not invent. It just, the background is on our podcast. We talked about what would you rather do. You fight a bear in the woods, fight a shark in the ocean, or fight a tiger in the jungle. And I had to go with a bear. And my excuse was that I felt like you could get behind it. It was slow enough of those that you could get behind it and put a chokehold on it, which obviously isn't practical. We're gonna die no matter what in any 3 of these situations. But because it's a fight to the death, not just get away. So they teased me and called me Kodiak Colby. And ever since then, I've had an alter ego. So I like going outdoors. I like camping, hiking. I don't do it very much, but I do super enjoy it when I do. But I'm not a known outdoorsman in real life.
So let's go back to the beginning then. So first of all, whereabouts in America were you born, and what kind of upbringing did you have?
I was born in kind of Nowheresville, Ohio. It just a small little town. We were out rural, surrounded by cornfields. The closest town to us was a town called Clyde, which its claim to fame was the Whirlpool appliances plant was there that made washers and dryers, or maybe it was just one or the other. And everybody in Clyde practically worked there. My father worked there for his entire adult life. I was raised really, I wasn't raised like a farm kid or anything like that, even though we were rural. My dad was really into like fixing cars, but I was never like into like those typical things, that he was into, things you might call manly. I've never really attracted me. Went to a really small school. There was no clubs or anything like that. If you didn't play sports, you kind of didn't do anything. And I played football, aka soccer, but that that was pretty much it. And I didn't have a lot of friends. There was no game group. I didn't know about D&D or Magic or have any of those early connections to games.
And you occasionally on the podcast have referred to your faith. Was there a strong sort of religious identity in that area?
There was, yeah. Part of the when I sold the business, part of the things that made it really hard was not only that was I losing my identity as, owner and operator of this business and being the head honcho, being able to control the direction of everything. At the same time, I was going through kind of a crisis of faith and losing my faith as an evangelical fundamentalist Christian, which is a far fall to make, because it does shape so much of your life and your thoughts that it's really you're left kind of rudderless for a time, and a huge part of your community tends to grow up around your church when you have that kind of faith where it's like we're in church 3 times a week. I worked at the church for 7 years, so yeah, I think that's the long and short of that.
And when you say America has a very broad sort of religious palette, when you say fundamentalist conservative, was this young Earth creationism, or did it not go that far?
It was all of it. It was young Earth creationism. Yeah, they didn't. My church in particular didn't have a huge interest in preaching that from the pulpit, but it is what they believed. It was part of that whole oeuvre. It was, anti-gay. It was very much a very, what do I want to say? Patriotic type, where for some reason the church is also tied to this sense of, I think patriotism would be the kind way to say it. I could go on and on with the things that disillusioned me with the church, but and I had a lot of anger around it for a while. But at this point, I'm pretty live and let live. But yeah, there were a lot of things. I think the first thing that cracked at my faith was when I first started working with Isaac Vega. We worked together for, I want to say like about a year, just kind of like spitballing on projects and trying to make stuff go. And as Plaid Hat was taking off, I was ready to bring on myself full time and Isaac. And Isaac, told me before you do that, I have to let you know that I'm gay. And, and I could tell he was nervous about it because he knew what my faith background was. And at the same time, like, it was a no-brainer for me in that instance, despite all of my upbringing and teaching, that that what I had been taught was wrong. Like, my conscience was very strongly pulling in a different direction of like, and I think it just took that personal, it no longer being an abstract thought, but was something that involved a real person. Because you very much stay in your bubble as part of that fundamental Christianity. But anyhow, that was that was kind of the first thing that started to make me question. And then from there, it was like pulling at a thread.
And where do you stand now in terms of your faith? Are you still a Christian? Do you see yourself as undecided, agnostic, or did you go across into non-belief?
I'm across into non-belief. I can entertain the idea of spirituality, but it gets so abstract. Just that getting into it would make me like sound really hippy dippy, and it's also like nothing that I hold as any kind of belief. It's just like if I were going to try to approach spirituality, like it would need to be, so elusive a concept as to have no structure and to make no sense to put any kind of name on it.
So returning to gaming then, when did games enter your life? Did you grow up as a child playing games, or was this something you hit out when you went to college or something like that?
The only games that we played as kids were just kind of like the mass market stuff. I can remember like being furious at games of Monopoly growing up, but no real like good hobby games. Like I said, like my school didn't have anybody that was playing any of them, so I just had zero exposure to anything hobby. And it wasn't until my first kind of hobby thing was just kind of a one-off freak accident in that the Lord of the Rings movies had just come out, and so I went and was in a bookstore looking at kind of the Tolkien section, and found a Lord of the Rings role-playing book by Decipher, and was just marveling at like, oh, so this is like a whole set of rules and to play out a story. And like I didn't even have the relationship with the terminology of role-playing game to understand like, oh, this is Dungeons and Dragons for Lord of the Rings. I didn't have any kind of connection. It was like I was discovering a thing for the first time, and kind of taught myself how to run it, probably very poorly, and ran it with friends for a couple of years. And, the challenge of any role-playing group is like consistently getting the same people together. And so just as it was starting to fall apart because of that, a couple of years later, a commercial for Heroscape came on TV, and I was like, oh man, that looks really cool. Like that has a lot of the the things that really interest me, of like this fantasy nature and this tactical nature, but we can play at any time, and again, this is how little I knew about hobby games. Is like Heroscape seemed like role playing to me, that they seemed the same genre to me. And I got into Heroscape and then got in hard to the point where it's like, okay, well, I found an online community of people that were into Heroscape, and then I saw that some of them were making custom units, and sought out how to find other miniatures and started doing that myself. And then I saw that Hasbro was releasing a special promo figure at this thing called Gen Con, and that was only a state away. So like, let's day trip it over there and get some of those boys. And with my friends that I like to play Heroscape with. And then, going to Gen Con opened me up to, oh, there's a whole world of gaming. And then Gen Con became a annual pilgrimage for me. And I haven't missed a year since.
Well, that brings us on to your first game, which is Heroscape. What do you think it was about it that fascinated you so much?
Well, its ability to reach me where I was at, for one. I mean, this is essentially a hobby product that was put out by Hasbro. So, most hobby products did not have the reach that this did. So that was a huge part, it being kind of the first touchstone. But then it was also just a fantastic product. Every miniature came pre-painted, and you could get a set of like 6 pre-painted miniatures for, I think, $12. Maybe it was 10 at Walmart. The whole master set, which had all this 3D buildable interlocking terrain and like 24 painted miniatures, was like $40. And that was like, oh man, that seems expensive, at first, because, and this is something that I still think about all the time whenever we're releasing a hobby game, is like, it has a lot of trouble breaking that barrier, because people think like, okay, well, the last time I bought Monopoly, that cost me $20. So this seems really expensive for a board game. Like, I think that is a huge barrier that we have, but this lowered the barrier enough, that my intrigue by it, around it, was able to get over what at the time seemed like a high price tag. Of course, I was like 22, so I wasn't exactly like rolling in it either. Those things I think combined, and then the online community for it was so creative and so cohesive that I really found kind of a place to hang out online and a place to kind of build identity, as did, I think, a number of people. And I think all those things just kind of collided to create what for me was and remains kind of my ultimate lifestyle game. It's not like I play it anymore as a lifestyle game, but it's always, when somebody asks what my favorite game is, I always go to Heroscape because of just the place that it holds for me. And you were choosing Heroscape was about, like, my collection is vast, so I feel like again it would, and it's got great meta, like building those maps and building up stuff that's cool there, and building an army. It feels like it would really have a lot to entertain and keep my attention in this post-apocalyptic landscape where I'm in a cabin.
And so you talked about, meeting people and the community being really vibrant. To what extent do you think Heroscape and the Heroscape community molded you as a designer? And was this really the foundation of you working in professional gaming?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, without Heroscape, I do not have the career I have now. It was from the first time that I saw people like making their own custom units. So they would like Photoshop an image of a Heroscape card and like Photoshop in a figure from a different game or whatever, like a Mage Knight figure. And then they would make up stats for it and powers. And I was so compelled by that, that I immediately started to do that, and post them up there and get feedback, and that all felt really good. And just the idea of trying to make precise language that followed the language of the original, things that, like, you write a power and you give it a name, and it's supposed to tell some kind of story, evoke some kind of theme. All of these things just turned on lit up a part of my brain. And we did creative endeavors, like we had a whole like fanzine that we had made. I ended up taking over the website and kind of building a whole new website. And there's this great just depository for all the creative stuff and community going on around Heroscape. And that eventually led to me play testing the game, becoming an official play tester, after having met Craig Van Ness and Rob Davio, who both were designers on the game. I met them at a Gen Con, like we went out to dinner together. And then from playtesting, kind of my activities there and just my general support of the game led to, I think at the time, Craig had been passing around this little task around writing bios for the website of different Heroscape figures as they came out. And he would just pass that around the office. And I think people had burnt out on it by whatever wave we were on, like 6 or something. And he asked me if I wanted to try my hand at it. at it. And so, I really threw myself into trying to do a great job with that. And that led to, more work of like, hey, I've got this game design that was submitted, or this idea that was submitted around, I can't really get into it because it never released, but, just this one mechanism. Can you like flesh this out into a game? And ended up doing 6 or 7 different projects on that, doing projects around Heroscape stuff that wasn't released. And then eventually Heroscape moved from Hasbro to Wizards of the Coast because they decided, well, we have a hobby game here. It should be with our hobby game company. And Jerry and myself were kind of the go-to to make Heroscape stuff after that.
And how did that feel? I mean, how did that feel being a fan of this thing? So much so that you make a pilgrimage to a GameCon, to being the person who's making it.
I mean, every step of the way kind of feels like, winning the lottery. Not, it was just like to meet Craig and Rob was such an exciting feeling, and then to be given a chance with the BIOS was just such an exciting feeling. I don't know how to describe it other than just like a sense of elation and a sense of really kind of finding something that maybe you're good at, and finding something that's real identity building and a sense of purpose. It was just kind of self-actualization kind of thing.
So I want to go on now and talk about Summoner Wars and forming the company Plaid Hat. So how did the idea of Summoner Wars come about?
I was had doing all this work for other games for Hasbro and that, and I think that there was a lull, a period where I wasn't actively working on something, and I decided to that I should try my hand at making my own thing. I've only worked on other people's games and ideas to this point, and I made a game, but it was clunky. It was too much, and as I was working on trying to like make it better, at one point, I had just determined that the thought popped into my head that like even if I do make this something worthwhile, like if I were to need to manufacture on my own, because in my head, like my thoughts were like, I'm going to show it to Hasbro because I have the connections there, but they're probably not going to want it because it's a hobby game, and it was rare for them to have done Heroscape in the first place. And then they pass it on to Wizards. So it's like, even though they had done it, they're kind of dumping it off. And then I thought, and then I'll show it to Fantasy Flight Games because they were kind of the big Ameritrash company at the time, which was what I was into, and still are the big Ameritrash company. But so that was running through my head because my thought was like, if neither of them want it, like at that point, if I'm like searching out a smaller publisher, maybe it just makes sense to do myself and start a game company because I want this to be what I do, whether that game company publishes a game here and there and works mostly freelance for other companies, maybe that's a thing. Anyhow, I was going to bed that night kind of with those thoughts mixing in my head, and kind of just in a spurt of inspiration while falling asleep where my mind's wandering from thing to thing, had the idea of like, well, what if it was a miniatures game, but it was using cards and a board, and then maybe then you have your whole army as just a deck of cards, and what that would cost like $10 for the customer, and then it was just one idea to the next, to the point where I kind of woke myself up in excitement and just went out and rattled away at the computer screen for a couple hours, and woke up the next morning. And if I still had that document, which I'm pretty positive I don't, it would look a lot like Heroscape as it became. Like a lot of the basic ideas were there from the very start.
Summoner Wars, you mean?
Summoner Wars, yeah. Also, Heroscape. There's a lot of obviously there's a lot of Heroscape DNA within Summoner Wars. It was my primary inspiration.
And so you formed Plaid Hat to release it. Where did the name Plaid Hat come from?
I was like, I had been growing my hair kind of long or whatever, and was trying to keep it back, and had like this plaid golfer's cap that I found at a Goodwill that I was wearing. Again, I was pretty young, so just doing something dorky, I guess. But one of the other Heroscapers like illustrated out a little avatar for me of me in the plaid hat. And so that became my avatar on all the Heroscape stuff. And because they knew me from conventions wearing the hat, and then I would post pictures of our game days and stuff like that playing Heroscape, and I was in the hat. So I just got associated with the hat. And when I was trying to come up with names for a company, I was coming up with all these generic fantasy, nerdy sounding things. And then John Cloudis, who owns Small Box Games and runs that, he didn't at the time. He was just another Heroscaper. He suggested Plaid Hat Games, and a bunch of people jumped on and was like, that's the name. And I liked it, and it was quirky and fun, and went with it.
And so Summoner Wars came out before Kickstarter was a thing. And it's kind of unthinkable now that a small company would release a game sort of straight to retail without a Kickstarter. How did you generate the buzz about the game? How did you get the game into stores and into distribution?
There was a lot less competition for new games then too. So getting people's attention, getting people to look at a new game wasn't nearly as hard, for one. But I was traveling the convention circuit and just, demo, got friends like stacked up into a hotel room, just doing demos all day long, at every convention we could, to just try to get people playing it, purchasing a copy there and talking about it. But I think probably the biggest breakthrough was, I got a copy to Tom Vassell of the Dice Tower, and he did a really glowing review of it and still ranks it as one of his top games. And that was a big deal in getting people to try it out.
And do you think Tom is still as much of a big deal now in terms of getting a game buzz as he was back then? Because I guess back then he was kind of the only game in town, right?
Yeah, there was a lot less. He wasn't the only one. I sent out a number of review copies, but he kind of stood alone as being a big reviewer. He was kind of the first reviewer doing video, and before that, he's kind of the first reviewer doing a lot of reviews in text. So yeah, he was pretty make or break. Now the importance around buzz, I think, is still tremendous. And I think it's also more difficult now because there are a lot of games out there vying for attention. It's already kind of a low barrier industry in that it's not like you have to have, a team of programmers and hundreds of thousands of dollars to make something. Or years and years of expertise. So the barrier is not all that high to begin with, and then Kickstarter lowers it even further. And for a while, like, you put something on Kickstarter and it was just going to fund if it was a board game. And so for a while, like, that lowered the barrier to almost nothing. And so there's a lot of games on the market, and it seems like anybody who's ever played a hobby game almost seems like they've got at least one game idea in them, or an aspiration to, or they're just thinking about, what I liked about this game and how it could be different, or here's an idea for a game and that would be fun. And some amount of those people are following through on that. So we're really spoiled for choice right now. But it also makes for it just makes it tougher as a publisher to try to capture somebody's attention amidst everybody else trying to capture their attention, right? So just I think as humans, we end up with this cognitive shorthand of, just moving on to the next thing, moving on to the next thing. I think if the first thing you see about it is glowing, then, either you're on board or you're willing to hear more. If the first thing you hear about it is just kind of mediocre, you're not going to look at a second opinion. You're not going to investigate it because there's so much out there. You know what I mean? And so in that way, I think it's a little harder to get attention on the market.
So your next game then is sort of the classic of all classics, and this is chess. So was this a game you played as a child, or was this something you picked up later?
This is something I did learn as maybe like a young teenager, tweenager or something like that. But it's not like I actively play it now. I'll play it if somebody were to offer. It's just my thought here, my strategy here was, if we're going to be stuck in this cabin long term, here's a game that people spend lifetimes mastering. And so it's really not going to run out of juice. You know what I mean? Like, it's a proven game that you're not going to break it. It will be strategic indefinitely,
And are you someone drawn to abstracts? I mean, you talked about being into Ameritrash games. Are you drawn to abstracts, or do they leave you rather cold?
I would say they leave me pretty cold. I'm not all that interested in abstract. I don't know why chess is kind of an exception. But I also think you could see the influence of chess on Summoner Wars as well. It's just, I don't know, like the moving and positioning of things, I think, to gain an upper hand. I think that appeals to me. I think maybe in a more thematic way that makes it more appealing to me. But it, like something like Go, has never really captured my attention or interest. I'll play an abstract game. I'll play a Euro game with a theme pasted on. I'll be engaged by them. But I never come away thinking like that was a really fun and memorable experience.
So I want to talk now about sort of the development of Plaid Hat. And so what I found really interesting when I first got into games, I was drawn to podcasts because I wanted to learn everything. And so I stumbled across your podcast. Why did you feel it was necessary to have a podcast that was attached to the publisher?
It wasn't really necessary. I think we're just this small group trying to do something that was fun and interesting. We're hanging out at hotel rooms as we, do conventions and generally goofing off. And I think the idea was just like, hey, what if we recorded some of this and what if we did a podcast, and that might be fun. We have, a bit of an audience. And then it kind of evolved from that into like, people, once we started doing it, just to do it, it was kind of thinking about how it can be better. My thought was like, well, what do we have that's unique or different? And it was that we were a publisher. So that became some of the focus, is like, seeing how the sausage is made a little bit. And it turned out that a lot of people were interested in that, either just as fans or as aspiring to do something in games themselves. So that just kind of became the focus of it. That was what we could leverage for attention.
And do you think it helped? Did it shift units having the podcast?
I do think it helped. I do think it helped quite a bit, actually, because when you have a podcast that is a group of friends getting together and it's a fun podcast where they have a good energy, you kind of feel like you're, part of that group in the way, or at least you feel like you know them in a way and like them. And it was good to be seen as more than just a kind of a faceless company. It was good to, because I think that, it caused people to root for us and games, they don't exist in a vacuum. Products don't exist in a vacuum. Your experience with them can be enhanced by the approach you're taking on them. And so if you're kind of following along with the development and who made it and kind of the things that they like and what they're into and what they were trying to do with it, I think all of that affects your experience with the product. And it helped us build, super fans, people who knew us and knew what we were about and would come up and chat with us at conventions. And so I think all of that helped tremendously in establishing our brand, I guess you could call it, but just who we were in the community of hobby board games.
And so you had a number of successes. Mice and Mystics was hugely successful. Dead of Winter was hugely successful. And then F2Z came and acquired you. What was their pitch to you when they asked to buy the company?
Well, my immediate thought was like, well, it's not for sale. And then they put a big number on it, and that made me doubt myself a little bit, but I was still thinking like, well, if they value it at that, then, so should I, and believe that, I can grow it to that. But my wife at the time felt differently about it. And eventually, we decided to sell the company on account of that, and also with some assurances that I would still be able to get to run the company, and then would be able to focus more on creative stuff because some of the accounting and sales and all of that nitty gritty would no longer be on my plate. And so that also sounded appealing. So I went for it. Does that answer the question? I'm sorry, I got a little lost there.
Yeah, that was great. And so how did your role change then? Did it become purely a kind of artistic role, for want of a better term?
No, it became more of like a go-between kind of role. There was time to do, some of the artistic stuff to help out with stuff. But I had always kind of been doing that. It become managerial, but without the same level of control. And so the hardest thing about that was, I had made the decision to sell. So like if the person I sold to wanted me to just follow out with their vision, like that's one thing. But another thing was like my vision and the vision of the people who were working alongside me were always kind of melded into one, and it was always us kind of trying to attack it together and to have ideas about how things should be and things we wanted to do, and to get told no, do it this way, was tough, not because of my own ego or pride of like, well, I know the right way to do it. It was because it felt like I was failing the rest of my crew, like unable to go and do these, this or that or whatever it was that we were trying to do. It deflates morale after a while, I think, when you're used to the one way and then it turns into something else.
And sort of F2Z then got acquired by Asmodee. Did things change then? Was there a different type of running the company, a different relationship with those above you?
Yeah, that actually felt better for a number of reasons, but primarily of which was like Asmodee North America was kind of spun off of Christian Peterson having sold FFG to Asmodee, and he was leading Asmodee North America. And he and his team really had an understanding of the kinds of games that we like to do. And so there were less misunderstandings there around like what art should cost and how long development should take. And I think we were just better understood as a studio at that point. And I think, Christian has made mention, not to me directly, but to other people who have said stuff to me that, that aspects of me reminded me of him when he was getting started. Just being passionate and having, strong ideas of how you wanted to do things. And so I think that there was I think we were afforded a lot of respect from him in certain ways that maybe are tough for me to put into words, but were felt. And so it felt good. It felt good to come under that umbrella and to gain access to all of this years of knowledge and in making these kinds of games. And so there were a number of things that felt really, really good about that.
So your next game then is very close to being my favourite game, and it's absolutely wonderful and storied and has been around for seemingly ever, and this is Dungeons & Dragons. So how influential do you think D&D is on modern gaming, especially kind of the Ameritrash side of games?
I think it's absolutely the genesis of D&D turned into how can we do short form D&D stuff like Hero Quest, and which I think combined with maybe war games and the rise of Euro games, like all these things kind of combined to I think make the Ameritrash game a genre, and so like I still like fantasy games seem to sell the best. There still seems to be this sense around the closer it is to its roots, the more appealing it seems to be for a number of people. Even if those people didn't grow up playing Dungeons and Dragons, I think it goes beyond that, to like, it's part of the DNA. Like it's part of geek culture that, geeks played D&D back in the day. And so people first getting into games even navigate towards that stuff as like, this is what my idea of a geeky game is.
And it's this kind of thing, right? When you play when you confront a beholder for the first time playing D&D, you go, oh, I've seen that thing around everywhere. So much of D&D is iconic, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so much of that is built on, Tolkien. So much of that owes its roots to Tolkien, but it is, it's obviously, it spawned the whole, this whole side of the industry, the thematic game side.
And when you play, do you mostly DM or do you mostly play?
I mostly play. I don't DM at all anymore. I don't know that if I've DM'd a single game of Dungeons and Dragons. I only DM'd when we were playing the Lord of the Rings role-playing game. But at this point, like I've never have the creative energy or time to commit to building a Dungeons and Dragons game, because like all that goes into trying to build something for Plaid Hat. But if I'm stuck in a cabin indefinitely, not only can the game go anywhere that your imagination can go, it's also like you have plenty of time to build all these intricate and creative worlds and scenarios.
And so a decree is put out, and it's a very bizarre world in which this decree is put out, but nevertheless, a decree is put out saying you can only have one class race combination for the rest of your life. What do you choose?
Boy, if I can only do it for the rest of my life, I guess it's going to have to be a magic user for sure. So like mage, wizard, which one's it called? Mage or wizard in D&D? Or there's probably both. Okay, so wizard. And for class, I typically play human. I don't know. Like I think I'm already in this fantastical world, so I think playing as human helps ground it a bit. It helps. I'm already like this, adventurer that knows, has these crazy skill sets and meeting all sorts of fantasy people, and so like to center myself in it. I go human. If I played D&D all the time, I'd probably branch out from that, but play a lot of one-offs and here and there, and so
I want to talk now about your reacquisition of the company. So what were the circumstances that led you to buying the company back from Asmodee?
The offer just kind of came on the table. It's hard to describe the exact circumstances or even my thoughts of what the circumstances were without getting into things that would get into kind of Asmodee's strategies, which all would be obviously stuff that I can't talk about. Having been an employee of theirs, that all falls under confidentiality. But suffice it to say, it did make sense for them to, or they had the feeling that it made sense for them to make an offer to wherein they kept kind of our evergreens, our reliable sellers, and sold the rest of those assets back to me, and let me continue to run with the company.
And it was big news when you were taken over, and it was big news when you became independent again. And I remember reading the very sort of impassioned letter that you published, and you were talking about the decision processes about whether to take up the offer or not. How difficult was it to come to the decision, and what sort of difficult decisions were there to make, especially in sort of reference to letting people go and things?
Yeah, it was really difficult. The primary decisions that I made were in an effort to keep the most people with a job as possible. It was kind of a situation where it was, if I were to say like, no thanks, and instead try to start up a new company without any pre-existing assets, without that Forgotten Waters in the chamber, it would basically just need to be me. Maybe I could afford to have one other person for a while. But by continuing with Plaid Hat, there was a path forward where, if Forgotten Waters was successful, and it is looking very much like it will be, then, I can keep this many people. And so that played in huge. And then and some of the people to let go were easier decisions than others. I mean, obviously, all of them were agonizing because I had never let anybody go before, and felt really responsible for having asked these people to come alongside of me. They're a part of my life that is different from, but in a way resembles family. And and so that was devastating. But some of the decisions were more, I guess, obvious than others in that, like, there was a couple of people that had very specialized roles that it would just make it sense to absorb into, spreading out amongst other people, because we would no longer have enough stuff to merit that role, at least not right away. But one of the decisions was ended up letting go of somebody who was a graphic designer, and it was Dave Richards, and he was the first person that I reached out to when I was working on Summoner Wars and had the idea for Summoner Wars, because he was a Heroscaper, and he had done a bunch of graphic design work for us in like the website's graphics and other fan projects and stuff. And he was just this really talented graphic designer. And I kind of reached out to him and was like, hey, I'm doing this, and I'd love to hire you freelance to come up with some visuals. And and he had come up with a set of visuals that was just my prototype that I was taking and showing to companies and to friends, and and then ended up doing all the graphics for the games. And he was my second hire after Isaac, to bring on full time, and had done the graphic design for so many of our games. So, and he was one of two graphic designers, and he was the one that I chose to let go. But that one was especially difficult and not an easy decision to come to. And it was very much a decision around, just what I thought was best for our direction, and kind of where I thought Dave was at emotionally with the company, and kind of where his excitement for things were at the time, versus another person that we had brought on that was new blood. It was also like the other I don't know how much I can get into with this stuff without kind of it's difficult for me to say too much here, because I don't want to say anything that somebody could hear and find hurtful, I guess. Because like Dave is this incredibly super talented graphic designer that absolutely should find work in the industry. It was just when shaping what the landscape of our company needed to look like from a fresh start, the other graphic designer I felt was a better fit.
And so a large part of Plaid Hat's success was built on the back of designs from Isaac Vega. You mentioned him previously, and I remember playing City of Remnants and being absolutely blown away by it. And Isaac decided that he didn't wish to continue with Plaid Hat. How hard was that for you?
That was really difficult. Like, it was a lot of, when the situation first popped up, he and Jerry were the first people I called. Well, he was away at the time, so I called him, and I talked to Jerry in the office, and laid out the situation as it was looking like it was developing. And then we decided, like, after the weekend when Isaac was going to be back, we all met at my house, away from the office, so that we could kind of openly discuss where things were headed and what we wanted to do. And my thought was around yeah, of course we'll want to build a company together. But Isaac, after having thought about it, he felt like he had been, what he expressed is that he had for a while been feeling like he was maybe ready to do something else, and that his passion had waned, and he just wanted to try other things. And he didn't plan to do that for maybe another year or so. But since this was a situation wherein a big change was happening, he felt like, maybe that was a symbol or just a good time to make a clean cut. And, after I got over trying everything to convince him that, no, this was going to be great, and realizing like that it was tough for him to make this choice and to continue to say, no, that this is what I wanted to do. I stopped trying to convince him and just, decided that I needed to cheer him on and whatever was next, and take any opportunity that might come in the future to work together, and that I could, and let him go do his own thing. And I'm not sure what that is for him. I don't think he knows what that is for him, but he's been getting more involved politically, and I think with activism and stuff like that, and community building, and then COVID-19 happens. And so like, I think that's been really tough on him from a standpoint of like, he was really getting into like meeting up with people every day and becoming part of some movements and stuff. But I'm excited to see what happens next for Isaac. I know whatever he does, that I'll be cheering it on, and if there's any way for me to support it, I'll be supporting it.
And so your next game then is one of Isaac's designs, and this is Ashes, and this is a 2-player head-to-head. Well, it's more than 2 players, but when I played it, I prefer to play it 2-player, and it's a head-to-head card game in the vein of, though not similar to, Magic. What does it do that other head-to-head card games don't do?
Well, I think that it is the best looking of all of them. For one, it uses dice and does it in a unique way that doesn't just make it super random. It's less dependent on the randomness of the card draw too. It solves a number of issues that those kinds of games have, and then also introduces its own unique things in ways that are very thematic and fun. But my first thought here was, I want a game with a great meta where, you can build all these different decks and try all these different strategies. Again, like the whole thesis of my being in a cabin is like, what's going to have longevity? And, of course, my first thought is Magic, because that is the most prevalent. And then I was like, but actually I like Ashes better, but no, like then it would be shilling for my own company if I go on there and say it's that one of my games is one of our games, one of my apocalypse games. But then I was like, what, forget it. Like, I'm like, that's the one I would want. So I'll pick that one. Unlike Magic, everything that releases for it, has released for it, has been like a ready to play thing, and there's no blind purchase elements. So like the card pull is as easy to own for everybody as it is everybody else. So all these things are things that I really appreciate about it, and and I have not ever dove deep on Ashes beyond the master set when we were developing that. After that, it was like Isaac working with the people who became fans of the game. Well, the master set and the first 2 expansions, I would say, were the things that I was most involved in. But there's this whole landscape of cards that I've only briefly ever interacted with, and I have like the complete collection in a pride of place on my shelf, with every intention to, one day dive into it hard. So yeah, I'm in a cabin. I want a game with a great meta. Ashes is it.
So I want to talk now about the future. And so you're currently delivering Forgotten Waters, and also you sent me a message saying because of COVID you're having to package and send them out to yourself. How happy are you with this game? And I guess it's the sort of the first game in the new independent Plaid Hat.
Well, this game was make or break for us. It continues to be make or break for us. I think let's break now because it's already gotten great reception. But it was also kind of make or break for the deal. It was, the game was always part of the deal. But when it came to like, do I start a new company or continue with Plaid Hat? There are all these great reasons to continue with Plaid Hat. It's my baby. But one of the big ones was that I knew we had Forgotten Waters in the chamber, and I knew it was something really special and great. And so, I was willing to bet real money that it was going to work. And then, we're now at the point where we're able to get copies out there. And we got some copies out to reviewers. And then Tom Vassell, the person who kind of launched the success of a company in a roundabout way, comes out with this glowing review of Forgotten Waters. And we went from 400 pre-orders, probably over a 2-month span of taking pre-orders, to like 500 more orders in 2 days after that released, and have since, and like I had brought over 1,500 copies for us to kind of have out of the print run that we did, apart from what distributors would have, thinking that, if the pre-orders go really well, then this will cover the pre-orders, and then we'll have copies to sell for our website for a while, and we will have copies for conventions and stuff. And then, but it's gone bananas, and now we're out of copies at this point, in part because of that review and all the stuff we've tried to do to get attention on the game. But also in part because we had set that April 10th date, and it was like this is our first time ever like setting an actual date. And we set in padding room on things that could go wrong, and we still hit the date. And it was very much we want to have a big to-do around a date. And then COVID-19 happened, and Asmodee's like, we're not doing any more new releases in all of April. And now I believe it's all of April and all of May. And so, it was like, we planned for, everything we thought could go wrong, to go wrong, and we'd still be able to hit our date. And so, I made the decision that we would still go forward, and with the date of April 10th for the pre-orders that we took direct. And then as soon as April 10th came, we switched over to, now instead of a pre-order, it's a normal order and the game's full price. but we'll donate 20% of any order we take in to your friendly local game store. You just name them and give us their address when you make the order. And because these retailers can't be open and can't be selling the games right now, we'll at least give them, what help we can through still, because it was important for us to get the game out, but still be able to support our retailers in some way. But now we're totally sold out, and there are more copies in our distributor's warehouse, but we don't have a retail date right now. We're shooting for, I think it's June 19th, but it stays that's the target date, but we don't know. We don't know when enough retailers will be able to reopen. And it's kind of a dangerous game just to send it out to the retailers who can fill now. I think that would help those retailers, but it would come at hurt for other retailers. And I think it would come at hurt to us too, because the way that board games are set up, at least right now, this whole industry is, again, because there's so much stuff going on all the time, distribution's kind of set up to, hey, here's a new game, it's released, and retailers all can take a look at it at that time, make an order, but there are also several other new games releasing at the same time, and there are new games every week. And so that's the big time where these retailers, that new release is this time where these retailers have a chance to look at the game, consider it, and decide if they want to get a few copies to stock and see if anybody's interested. And then from there, we're kind of counting on pull through, meaning like our marketing, our direct to consumers, causing consumers to go to those stores, pick up a copy, and then the retailer say, okay, this is a game that has sold out of its copies in a reasonable amount of time. I'll order more, and then just keep doing that. Then we're just counting on the reorders once we've been given that chance. And so if we were to launch the game now, there are so many retailers who aren't buying new games right now because they can't sell games right now because they sell out of a physical space that isn't open. That I worry that we would crash the game trying to do it.
And so, what's going to come in the future from Plaid Hat Games, and are you going to return to designing?
Yeah, I'm doing design work right now on a second edition of Summoner Wars that I expect will be early next year, 2021. It's when it first got announced that we were going independent again, I saw a lot of chatter of people like, bring back Summoner Wars, bring back Summoner Wars. A lot of bring back Ashes too. But it's something that I had been working on in different ways for a while. I had been considering for a while. But I had this idea that like people aren't really interested in a 2-player competitive card game right now. The landscape for it doesn't look real good, at least based on kind of, we had done a game called Guardians. We had done a game called Crystal Clans. Neither had taken off. We knew that other partner companies within Asmodee were not having a lot of luck with them. So it was a thing that I didn't think was viable right now. So it was just kind of sitting on the shelf, but so many people saying it. And then the idea that like we were starting Plaid Hat Games again, and just kind of like the cyclical nature of that felt really good. And I said like, well, what the heck? Like, let's give it a go. and that's been really exciting. Playtesting has just opened up. We have a bunch of playtesters that are chattering like crazy on the Discord server we set up for it. And we've built a whole way to play it online for playtesters, and it logs data for every game. And when they finish playing it. And so we've got these great tools for playtesting, and that's all starting to unfold, and conversations around kind of the new structure of the game and stuff are unfolding, and it's really rewarding to be working on it again.
So your last game then is Gloomhaven, and I think I know the answer to this question, but are you taking this for purely practical purposes because there's just so much in the box?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly why. I mean, obviously, it's super well rated. I've never played it, but it's super well rated. It seems very Ameritrashy, which is, that's me. And then, yeah, it just like whenever I've looked at somebody's copy of it, there's so much there that it's daunting. Like it scares me off, frankly. But if I'm stuck in a cabin situation, it's like that's exactly what I want. Like it's something that is really going to be a deep dive.
And so you look at Gloomhaven, and though you haven't played it, it is number 1 on BGG. Are you happy that a game like that is the one that kind of represents the hobby?
Well, again, I haven't played it, so I can't speak, I can't speak to that majorly, but the fact that it's number 1 on BGG, yeah, I really enjoy that's the case, because BGG, at least historically, has very much seemed to trend as favoring Euro style games, which I do enjoy, but they're not my go-to, and they're obviously not what Plaid Hat typically does. So the fact that it was able to make number 1 despite that, I think, is really a testament to what a really well-designed Ameritrash game can be. It both elicits interest from a gameplay element, from a tactical and strategic element that keeps people engaged, but also that kind of one of the theses of Plaid Hat Games is that stories make for these indelible moments. They make for great game experiences when the theme of the game and the story of the game unite to lead to these great narrative moments, whether emergent or scripted or a combination of both. And so the fact that that's a number 1 game really gives me a lot of faith in the kinds of projects that we like to do.
So one last question then. You're on the way to the cabin, you're heading out 88 miles an hour, and you go around the corner, the back door of the car flies open. 4 of the games fly out, down a ravine, into a river, and are swept away to eternity. Which game do you hope is sitting in the back seat of the car?
Oh, man. Wasn't expecting this twist. The old falls out the back seat. I gotta keep Heroscape, I guess. Like, if worse comes to worse, I can build a shelter out of all that terrain. It's too sentimental. Like, it's too sentimental of a possession. Like, there's been some like classic old school Heroscapers that have sold their collection, and I just don't know how they do it. You asked if things are important to me. For the most part, no. Like, my Heroscape collection, I'm never going to sell it, no matter how valuable it becomes. Unless it comes to like sell it or to feed my family or starve. Like, it's definitely by far the most sentimental of that whole collection.
So if people want to get hold of you, if they want to see what Plaid Hat's up to, how do they go about doing that?
You can go to plaidhatgames.com. You can find all the stuff we're doing there. You can find us on Twitter at Plaid Hat Games. You can find us on Facebook. Somehow, I don't know. / Plaid Hat Games, maybe? I don't know. I haven't done Facebook in quite some time. But Plaid Hats on Facebook. You can catch us in your favorite podcatcher, the Plaid Hat Podcast. There's a bunch of ways to connect to us.
Brilliant. Well, Colby Dauch, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it in your own blog, podcast, or video. Or you can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to chomp through my leg chains and flee the Barry Manilow beholders, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.